If you're anything like me, when you splice your rig lines, they end up a bit of a mess. The strands I can't keep them consistent, and sometimes it gets frayed. This one's actually not too bad compared to others. But what I like to do is actually shrink wrap some tubing, some rubber tubing on this, which actually is quite useful for feeding it through the gills of fish, and it protects it a bit so it doesn't rub, get more frayed, so it lasts slightly longer. But it's also useful for color coding. I do them different colors for the different length rig lines. I have 3 different lengths generally that I use until a shark comes along and cuts it in half. But yeah, I tend to have 3, and to have them different colors makes it easier for me to identify, because it's probably the same type of rope that I've used. So I'm gonna shrink wrap those down with a heat gun, and I'll show you how I do that. What I also use sometimes is a speed spike, also known as a speed feeder. These attach to the end of the gun, and the actual rig line will go through. So you push it through like this, feed it up the other end, and then when you pull it through, it's like that, sitting on the end of the gun. This clips onto a shark clip at the back end of the gun. These are really quite handy to push it up through the gills if you're feeding fish onto the rig. There's pros and cons with them though. When you dive down, I use this quite a lot to tap on the gun to create noise, and it's really good to have that handy, and you tap. I sometimes tap it on my weight belt too. Useful for that, to create noise, but sometimes it creates noise when you don't want it to create noise. It'll rattle just as you're lining up on a fish that doesn't know you're there, and then you get this rattle and the fish spooks. I've had that happen. And also when you hit the bottom, these sink, and sometimes I've had it like hook under something, and when you go to lift your gun, if you're waiting for a fish in anticipation and then it's sitting on the bottom and it falls down and you go to lift the gun, sometimes it actually hooks under something and stops you getting the gun out until you look back, and by the time you free it, the fish has moved on. But if you do have an actual lining on the end of this rig, you may not need the speed feeder or the speed spike, because it may be solid enough to actually just push up through, and because it'll be rubber, this tends to slide across, doesn't get caught in the gills. So that's another thing, and then it will float. So pros and cons, but I'm going to show you how I can do that. And yeah, as I said, it's really great to identify the different length rigs, because sometimes you switch between guns for different depths, different days, different visibility, and so it's quite handy to know what you're dealing with and how deep you can go before you'll actually tap out and hit the max. So I'll show you how to do that now. So what I'm going to need to do this is obviously the spliced rig line. I'm going to need some heat shrink tubing. This is different size in this pack, and you have to remember this is 4mm for example, but when you splice it, it's doubled over. So I'm probably going to need, because it's 8mm, the 9.5 should do it. If not, there's 12 in there as well, and there's even 19. And I've got a heat gun. This is just a cheap heat gun that'll melt it down once I've got it on. So I'll open this pack and put it on there, and we'll get gluing it up, and hopefully it looks alright. Okay, so I've had my tubing. What you can do is, if it's really tight, is tie a small piece of string on that and feed it through the string, and then just pull it through. This one's not too tight, so it should be okay if I just put it in there, slide it on. You keep a little bit of pressure to keep it open as you push it in. Let's get in there. Okay, so it's not too bad. So I'm going to shrink this down. There'll be obviously a few ripples in it, but that's okay. So working it round. As you can see, that's all pretty good there, that's sealed on. It's still loose here, still a bit warm. That's because I went past the splice, so what I'm going to do is just cut that off gently. And then once it's cooled down, you can see it's pretty good. Looks quite nice, and then anytime you slide that through a fish, it should slide right through. So I've done the other end. Obviously there's 2 ends to do. I didn't apply any heat to here because I'm going to cut that off. It's actually easier if you don't. And just be careful, there's a temptation once you cut that off to try and reheat that, but you will probably put too much heat on the rope itself, and you can damage that. So best to just cut it off and then leave it. Cut into it, because I can see I've left space, and once I get that'll just tear off, and I can take that. Oh, I can't. So that's, yeah, all done. That should slide through okay, and it's color coded. Should be quite nice in the water. So to get it through on a smaller one, I've tied a little piece of string, just if you had a smaller one, you didn't have a larger one. Hopefully I can get that through. Out the other side. So yeah, I've pulled it through. Now we'll just open that in. Once we get it started, this is the widest part. I'm not sure if this one will fit because it's quite tight, but it might. Yeah, it did. You can see that, it's pretty good. So that's good, you can use those thinner ones too. And then I will just take that off and do that part as well. Easily identifiable and ready for use. And there you have it. I've rigged up three lots for 3 different spear guns, different lengths, different colours, so that I know which is which, and I can swap them between guns depending on what type of diving I'm doing. It was a good thing I actually changed, because I noticed on another rig that something must have hit that, so it's a bit weaker. So it was a good time to change rigs anyway. So yeah, I can swap these around, make it work for the type of diving I'm doing, type conditions, and it should work well.